such that even though these are really small, and they only weigh 4 kilograms, less than 1,000th of the mass of the previous satellite that I showed, they have a tremendous amount of capability. They have relatively high resolution capability in taking pictures of the Earth. And they have a huge amount of compute power, a huge amount of storage power, actually that blows a lot of other satellites out of the water, even though they're much, much smaller. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we build these things and how we got there, and then show you some of the early imagery that we're taking down from the satellites today. So on this journey, we started here, which is a little garage, not so far from this place, up in Cupertino. Now, it's a fairly regular thing in Silicon Valley to build your first prototype in the garage. That is de rigueur here. But we do believe that for a space startup, we were the first. It's kind of unusual. We take a different approach to building satellites. We release early release often. We've basically looked to the developer community of software around Silicon Valley for inspiration as to how to do a startup. So it's not like an aerospace startup at all, but more like the sort of approach that one sees in Google or Facebook or these sort of companies. And just like they have things called agile software, we have what we call agile aerospace. And it's really at the core of what we do. So we try and release early release often, like the software development community does. We try and test things and break them. We don't mind taking our satellites out into the field and test them there. We use in space as a test bed. And what bonds us all, though, as a team, is really figuring out how to use satellites to help humanity. That's really our mission. And in fact, the 3 founders of the company, Chris, Robbie, and I, we all met at a UN conference where we were looking at how to use satellites to do exactly that. How to use satellites to protect the environment, how to use satellites to help people in developing countries. And so that's really what unites us as a team. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about agile aerospace, the kind of thing we mean. So we mean rapidly iterating the satellite capability with the latest hardware that we can find commercially. So we leverage the billions of dollars that's been invested in commercial technology and put it into our satellites. We iterate the satellites on a fairly regular basis. We've been through 10 design iterations in the last 2.5 years. And I think the crucial thing that this enables us to do is essentially strap our satellites to Moore's law, which sounds like something kind of obvious that we should be doing, but is really not what is happening in the traditional aerospace sector. We see these long lag times between design and launch, and between launch and final operations. We are taking the latest technology off the shelf and taking a different risk approach. Instead of building a satellite so that it has 99.9% probability of success, we deal with risk in a completely different way, which is redundancy. So we put up more satellites than necessary, and if a few fail, it's just not the end of the world. That's how we deal with risk. We also mean putting it up there quickly, testing it, and then in space, and then iterating the capabilities. So what we mean by agile aerospace is cemented in many ways by just the fact that we've launched 71 satellites in 15 months on 6 different launch vehicles. So we've actually thrown up into orbit 6 of those design iterations that we tested on the ground first, of those 10, and put them in space. And most of the satellites that we've launched are actually been launched in the last 6 months with these 3 launches. So 67 of the 71 satellites have been launched in the last 6 months. And really, this is just the beginning for us. But that's what we mean by agile aerospace. Another thing we've done is applied modern manufacturing techniques to satellites so that they're not individual bespoke items. Once we finish the design, we figure out how to manufacture it at scale by just applying modern production technologies to satellites. There's nothing magic here. We're just doing what a lot of other industries already do, but we have applied it to satellites. This is the flock 1 in what we call the nest, because we call our satellites doves. We call them doves, by the way, because many satellites are named after birds, but normally birds of prey. And, well, it's like eagle, swoop, kill, kestrel, eye, spy, or whatever, this sort of nomenclature. And ours have a humanitarian mission, so we call them doves. And these are the doves in their nest in our lab, and we call them a flock, and that's how we launch them. So I'm going to show you a video of 2 of these satellites being launched from the International Space Station back in February, of the first fleet that we have. And it might initially seem like it might be seem like it's been photoshopped, because it doesn't really look quite real. But those are 2 of our satellites being deployed from the ISS. And the space station solar array gives you a bit of a sense of scale. And the hair is really just for context there. This was taken by an astronaut looking out of the window of the ISS at our satellites. They actually pressed the go button. And it's a really unique opportunity for us, because normally the last time you see your satellite is when it's bolted to the side of the launch vehicle pre-launch, and you never get to see them in space. And so it was really delightful for us to be able to get this tremendous amount of footage from NASA of the launches. And what we say to what we say to investors and things is that we have the astronauts throw our satellites out of the space station. It's not quite true, but it's not so far. So those were 2. We launched 28 like that. Then we launched another 11 on the NEPA rocket 3 weeks ago. And then we also, about a week and a half ago, launched another 28 that are currently on board the space station, but haven't yet been thrown out the window. So that's these flocks of satellites together. And I want to give you an idea of what they're going to do once they're all up there. And these are just the first set, so we're launching a lot more. But altogether, they start acting like this. In a single sun-sync plane, they stay fixed with respect to the sun, and they're all pointing down, taking images. Now, the Earth rotates every 24 hours underneath this plane, such that every 24 hours, we take a picture of every single point on the Earth's surface. We call it a line scanner for the planet. Essentially, we're taking a picture of every single spot on the Earth's surface every day. And this is how we get the data down. We have a series of ground stations distributed around the planet. This is the one that we have in New Zealand. And on our satellites and on our ground stations, we put artwork, because we have pride in what we're putting up and putting around the planet. So you can see this beautiful artwork on the side of our dishes. So we have about 12 ground stations, each with about 5-meter antenna, which receive our data back down to the ground over X-band radios. So I'm going to show you some of the early imagery that we've been taking down with our satellites, just so that you get a bit of a sense for the kind of things that we can see. This is the very first image that we took down from our very first satellite, Dove 1. It happened to be over Oregon when we took this picture, and what was really awesome for us is that we always said that we could see every tree on the planet, and we'd be able to count every tree on the planet and check for deforestation. And here we were, the very first image we got down, and we saw individual trees and a forested region in Oregon, so we could prove the point. In fact, we overlaid it on Google Earth and saw an area of deforestation in the corner of this image. So it immediately showed this value proposition of taking imagery on a regular basis around the Earth. This is the first image we took from the fleet that were launched back in February, which, when we first turned the camera on, happened to be over the UC Davis campus in California. And what's really fun is if you look at the difference between that image and the most previous image that was taken by satellites of the same area, and you immediately see that buildings were built, and that the general point here is that we'll be able to see urban growth as it happens in every town around the whole Earth every single day. Similarly, in the edge of these imagery, you can see a lot of agricultural fields. Actually, by ratioing a couple of the spectral bands, we can see the crop yield. And with this, we can tell crop growth in every field, in every farmer's field, in every country around the world every day. And that's useful for lots of other reasons. So Now I'm going to show a few pictures that were taken of various parts of the world with our latest fleet of satellites that just got turned on from Flock 1C from the NEPA launch, I guess 3 or 4 weeks ago now. This is in China. We see an airstrip. We actually saw some planes on this airstrip. We'll be able to track that sort of movement as it happens around the world every day. This is a picture we took in Brazil, and you can see these circular irrigation systems on certain agricultural regions. We can see all the buildings of all these different farm houses. We took this image of the Suez Canal, where you can see these boats lining up to go up the Suez Canal. The general point, again, is that we'll be able to track all the boats in all ports around the world every single day, see where they're going, and that's really useful for people. It could be useful for various kinds of people. It could be useful for NGOs. It could be useful for businesses. Now I'm going to show a few images that show a little bit about the change that's happening on the planet. Because one of the advantages of taking pictures of the whole Earth every day is that you see the change as it happens. So this is a mine in China, a coal mine. And this was the previous image of that area. So now if I flip back and forth, you can start to see the extent to which the mining area has changed. You can even see the little, if you look down here, you can see these little trucks or whatever they are that move the produce of the mine back and forth. Sorry, let me just, so you can see those guys going along there. Moving forward then, I thought I would look, see if there's an image of this hotel that we're in. And this is the San Jose airport. And this is the building we're in, which is just here. And there's not a particularly good image. It's a little bit overexposed. But even on this one, you can see a bunch of things have changed. In fact, for example, you can see a new, not runway, but what do they call those things? Taxiways on San Jose Airport since the last image was taken. In fact, let me highlight some of the changes. So there's that new taxiway. Some school has built a little stadium up here. Pete Worden might be interested to know that there's a new building up on there. That you can see up here a tremendous amount of change to some, I don't know what exactly is happening up there. But we see a lot of change as it happens around the world every day, like this. Here's a picture we took in China, and here's the previous most image that was taken of that area. You might literally be going, okay, is that the same spot? Because it looks so radically different. But if I flip back and forth, you can see that there is indeed the same roads and river up the top there. But what has happened here is a tremendous amount of things. So if I go forward, you can see they have changed the irrigation system from these little thin strips to these circular irrigation systems. They've essentially built an entire town up in this corner. They've drained this lake. They've built these buildings. They've put a new lake over here. China's like one giant construction zone. Every time we take pictures there, loads of things have changed. And this was an image that was taken just a few days ago of a wildfire that was in California. And we took this image just 15 minutes after the fire was detected. And the great thing is that we could see the extent of the fire and help alert the fire departments about that. So the general point here is that we can detect change as it happens around the Earth's surface. And there's a tremendous amount of humanitarian and commercial value in that data set. And so I want to come back to this, which is our little Earth. You see, because there's so many applications, I mentioned just a few, the deforestation, the agriculture, tracking mining output, tracking ships out of ports. There's hundreds of applications, and we don't think that we as a company can exploit all of those applications. The best thing that we could do, therefore, is to provide that data out for everyone. So we intend to democratize access to this information we're gathering over a developer API so that anyone around the world can find out the information that they want from this data set. Another reason to do that is that we don't think we have a monopoly on the best ideas, and that probably the best use of this data we haven't even thought of yet. And so we intend to democratize access to this data. And the biggest level picture is that we think this information could be useful for people to make better decisions and actions such that we can take care of this planet. In fact, let me make an analogy. To control systems, when you build a spacecraft and it's tumbling, say, you need to take information on the control state of that spacecraft. And importantly, you need to take information on the control state of that spacecraft faster than the tumbling time scale if you're going to take care of that spacecraft and to correct its orientation. Or similarly, if you're building a human spacecraft, then you need to measure the oxygen levels on a faster time scale than they change if you're going to do something about it if there's a problem and have a closed-loop life support system. Well, I've got news for you all. We all live on a spaceship. It's a big spaceship. It's called the Earth. As Buckminster Fuller said, Spaceship Earth. And it has a closed-loop life support system, and we have to take care of it. And if we're going to take care of it, we need data on a time scale that's faster than human action. And that means on days, not years, which is the current situation. And so we believe this data set will help us collectively to take stewardship of Spaceship Earth. And I would like to just say that we're only in the early phase of development of this system. We've launched a lot of satellites, but we've got a lot more satellites to launch and a lot more technology to develop. But we do hope that our little doves can help us a little bit on this big problem of helping to take care of our planet. And we hope also that the Space 2.0 community, or NewSpace, as whatever you like to call it, can all contribute to helping us to take the data that we need to take care of a planet with humanity and other life upon it, and to pursue our dreams. So thanks very much. Apparently questions can line up. If you have any questions, fire away. If I've answered everyone's questions, that's pretty impressive.
So have you got companies coming to you yet saying, we'd like to build a constellation of satellites that are similar to yours but different use? And are you talking about partnerships or building for them or stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. We get companies all the time approaching us to build fleets of satellites, and the universal answer is no, because we're not selling satellites. We are developing. The satellites are a unique asset, but what we're doing is provisioning data. The information is what we're trying to collect, and we're selling and provisioning that to people, not satellites. Please.
Well, that sort of answered my question about your direction in the future and, and the constellations. But are you looking at the, if someone came to you with a requirement for a low data rate constellation or higher data rate, have you looked at what you can do with a 3U, or are you looking bigger for future constellations?
Well, definitely the 3U form factor is not set in stone. We will look at future directions for satellites, but you mentioned the word requirements, and I think this is one of the challenges that space companies have had in the past. By being requirements driven by the government or whoever the prime customer is, has led to a tremendous amount of constraints that has caused a lot of problems. And requirements creep has led to satellites being way more complicated or taking the wrong sort of risk approach that we've led to these billion-dollar assets. So part of the thing we've moved away from is to not be requirements-driven at all. We've gone after a genuine commercial challenge of getting this data down and provision it to customers, and we deal in data. We don't talk to them about the satellites. That's the back end, nothing for them to be worried about. We will provision them and sell them the data. We will, of course, listen to their needs in terms of the data, But we're not going to change the spacecraft requirements directly for them. That's the back-end system. Just like no one talks to, you know, if you have a problem with Google, you talk to them about search. You don't talk to them about their servers. You know, that's their back-end. So satellites are just the back-end for providing a service of data. And I think that's the direction here. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly.
Yeah. One other question: how many launches are you looking at over the next few years?
A lot.
Okay.
Hi, I'm kind of continuing on your future plans idea.
Mm-hmm.
Super amazing idea to image the Earth so often in a day. Have you considered equipping your doves with infrared so you can see passive infrared and stuff?
Yes, we have. We've considered that a lot, and I think that's a fantastic thing to do. You know, right now we are laser focused on taking optical imagery of the Earth, but that's the kind of potential future I think that we would entertain once we've got this sort of thing accomplished.
Can you comment on some of the web services that you're planning on providing to other vendors?
Not really. So we've got a lot in the works, but we like to really only talk about things once we've done stuff that's concrete, that is ready to show to people. We only really announced our existence once we'd already put a couple of satellites into space. So that's the way we do things generally. And so we've got a lot of things in the works, but that will be for a later time.
That you will be selling web services similar to what Amazon or some other vendors?
It will certainly involve selling the imagery in some way, yeah.
I just wonder if you could tell us about the inclination and lifetimes and things like that that you're working with.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we design our satellites so that they can go into many different sorts of orbits because they're primarily being launched as secondary payloads, and a secondary payload is obviously a little bit beggars can't be choosers on where it's going. And we want to make our satellites such that they can be able to utilize as many of the launch opportunities as possible. So right now, our satellites are in one of two orbits. They're either in the ISS orbit, which is 52 degrees and around 400 kilometers, or in the sun-sync orbit around 500 to 600 kilometers. And our ideal orbit is sun-sync around 450, but we can make use of those orbits pretty well. Obviously, the lower you go, the lower the lifetime. And one of the challenges with the ISS orbits is that the lifetimes are fairly short because they're really low, and we're going under space station. But also, there's advantages of going low, which is things like increased resolution for a given optic size. What we want to do is release the new satellite generations into orbit in our, on a sort of year timescale or faster, so that we take full use of Moore's law, and that they're not antiquated in that sense technologically.
Just as a follow-up question,
yeah.
Can you talk about is your business plan of selling the data or working with specific applications, and also do you make available sample data for people to start working on it?
Yeah, absolutely. We make available sample data to all of our customers. Yeah, lots of it. Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah. Have you had any pushback from like organizations or governments that aren't interested in having their property imaged by a separate party?
Well, so we have. There are various things you have to do as an Earth imaging company, in the US to get permission to take images of the Earth, including getting a license from NOAA, and they, if you like, license us to do this, and they give certain bounds on what we can do and what we can provide. It's not very limited in the sense that we can give our data to anyone, but they have certain exceptions under certain circumstances where they can say, no, we don't want to provision that. Does that answer it?
Yeah, so what about like private companies? Could they say like, no, you can't photograph this one construction site or anything like that? Could anybody just give you a stipulation that way?
No. So the essential thing is that early on in the space era, the Soviet Union and Russia came to an accord that they were going to allow each other to take pictures of each other's land from space, but not from the air. So, there was the famous incident of the U-2 spy plane being shot down because they agreed that they weren't going to allow each other to do that, but they were going to allow each other to fly over in space, partly because there's nothing much you can do. You can't just turn left just as you come into the Soviet Union or the US or what have you. Obviously, Kepler's laws are what they are. But also because they thought that it would be good for general transparency. And a lot of historians have said that this was a really good thing for general transparency during the Cold War. But it led to this general arrangement where everyone agreed that satellites can take pictures of anywhere without having to ask one another. And so the general international law about it is a free-for-all, if you like. Yeah.
Hi, my question had to do with the control of your individual spacecrafts. Do you guys actually control all of them yourselves, or do you have a third party who's actually controlling each spacecraft?
No, we just let them go, see what happens. No, no, we do control our spacecraft, yeah. Yeah, and on board we have 2 systems of attitude control. We have reaction wheels and magnetometer coils that steer the satellite attitude, and we have various systems for attitude determination. We control all of the satellites from a mission control in San Francisco via our network of ground stations dotted around the world. Okay. Yeah, last question maybe? It looks like we've just got 1 more minute. Yeah.
So early on in the Earth imaging industry,
yeah.
That some of the applications were unexpected and had to do with monitoring what governments were up to for sort of the general population, including weapons of mass destruction and war zones and things like that. Have you looked at applications like that that will maybe be of interest to journalists or to citizens around the world?
Yeah, actually, I think that there's a tremendous interest in this data from a journalistic standpoint. Essentially, if you take the difference between today's image and yesterday's image of the Earth, much of the world's news. You might see a fire over here, as we did, or you might see a missing plane, or you might see a flood, or you might see what have you. And so taking the difference between today's image and yesterday's image will highlight a lot of the world's news. And also, it's not just about detecting the news, but also about displaying the news. So, for example, a lot of what the news journalists do today is show a picture of Google Earth and then draw on where the flood is, or what have you. We could, of course, show an image of the flood and without the flood and the difference, and that would be useful for displaying the news and showing it and making it real what's really happening on the ground. So I think that's a great idea, and it's one that hopefully people will use our data for. Thanks. Oh yeah, we can take that one? Okay, go ahead.
Tagging on to the back of that, you spoke about the possibilities of search and things like that, and I was wondering if you had gotten interest about analytics tools, providing analytics tools as well, like companies or potential clients coming to you and saying, like, we want the data, but we don't know what to do with it. And are you exploring that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, in fact, that's really the value chain is in the analytics. It's most people don't want pretty pictures. Of course, a lot of consumers like to see pretty pictures of their house and what have you, but many people want to just know how many ships are in the port, how much output in from this copper mine, what is the crop yield in Ukraine of soy. And those sorts of questions are things that need analytics to extract that information from the pictures. And so really, once we get the pictures down, that's just the beginning of a journey of exploiting information that's of use to people around the world. So certainly, we envision partnering, and what we want to do is create this open API where anyone can come and run their own analytics on our imagery. So that's the whole point of that API.
Thank you.
No worries. Okay, thanks a lot, guys. There you go. Thanks a lot, Hannah. So we leverage the billions of dollars that's been invested in commercial technology and put it into our satellites. We iterate the satellites on a fairly regular basis. We've been through 10 design iterations in the last 2.5 years. And I think the crucial thing that this enables us to do is essentially strap our satellites to Moore's law, which sounds like something kind of obvious that we should be doing, but is really not what is happening in the traditional aerospace sector. We see these long lag times between design and launch, and between launch and final operations. We are taking the latest technology off the shelf and taking a different risk approach. Instead of building a satellite so that it has 99.9 probability of success, we deal with satellite. We try and release early release often, like the software development community does. We try and test things and break them. We don't mind taking our satellites out into the field and test them there. We use in space as a test bed. And what bonds us all, though, as a team, is really figuring out how to use satellites to help humanity. That's really our mission. And in fact, the three founders of the company, Chris, Robbie, and I, we all met at a UN conference where we were looking at how to use satellites to do exactly that. How to use satellites to protect the environment, how to use satellites to help people in developing countries. And so that's really what unites us as a team. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about agile aerospace, the kind of thing we mean. So we mean rapidly iterating the satellite capability with the latest hardware that we can find commercially. It's a fairly regular thing in Silicon Valley to build your first prototype in the garage. That is de rigueur here. But we do believe that for a space startup, we were the first. It's kind of unusual. We take a different approach to building satellites. We release early, release often. We've basically looked to the developer community of software around Silicon Valley for inspiration as to how to do a startup. So it's not like an aerospace startup at all, but more like the sort of approach that one sees in Google or Facebook or these sort of companies. And just like they have things called agile software, we have what we call agile aerospace. And it's really at the core of what we do. So with risk in a completely different way, which is redundancy. So we put up more satellites than necessary, and if a few fail, it's just not the end of the world. That's how we deal with risk. We also mean putting it up there quickly, testing it, and then in space, and then iterating the capabilities. So what we mean by agile aerospace is cemented in many ways by just the fact that we've launched 71 satellites in 15 months on 6 different launch vehicles. So we've actually thrown up into orbit 6 of those design iterations that we tested on the ground first, of those 10, and put them in space. And most of the satellites that we've launched are actually been launched in the last 6 months with these 3 launches. So 67 of the 71 satellites have been launched in the last, such that even though these are really small, and they only weigh 4 kilograms, less than 1,000th of the mass of the previous satellite that I showed, they have a tremendous amount of capability. They have relatively high resolution capability in taking pictures of the Earth. And they have a huge amount of compute power, a huge amount of storage power, actually that blows a lot of other satellites out of the water, even though they're much, much smaller. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we build these things and how we got there, and then show you some of the early imagery that we're taking down from the satellites today. So on this journey, we started here, which is a little garage not so far from this place, up in Cupertino. Now,